The ancient Egyptian word for their land was Kemet, which means the black. Fake black Israelites claim this is because the skin color of the ancient Egyptians was allegedly black. However, Egyptologist Herman Keyes notes, the black, fertile soil gave Egypt its name Kemet, the black. The word does not have anything to do with skin color. Likewise, Professor of Old Testament Robert A. Bennett confirms, Egypt referred to herself as the Black Land, Keme, alluding to the rich mud from the Nile inundations. The ever-encroaching desert was called the Red Land, Dashre, end quote. Another way fake black Israelites try to show the ancient Egyptians were Negro is they appeal to the writings of the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who lived in the 5th century BC. In his work, The History of Herodotus, he says people called the Colchians were Egyptians. Colchians were people who lived in what today is the country Georgia. Then fake black Israelites argue Herodotus described the Colchians as Negroes. Herodotus wrote, "For the people of Colchis are evidently Egyptian, and this I perceived for myself before I hear it from others. They are dark-skinned and have curly hair. This of itself amounts to nothing, for there are other races which are so, but also still more because the Colchians, Egyptians, and Ethiopians alone, of all the races of men, have practiced circumcision from the first." However, Herodotus was not the most reliable when it came to his descriptions of other people's ethnic features. Consider his inaccurate claim that the semen of Indians and Ethiopians was black, like the color of their skin. Secondly, he was probably not even describing Colchians as Negroes. As historian of ancient Egypt, Simpson Najavitz observes, had Herodotus wanted to designate the Colchians as blacks, and by extension designate the Egyptians as blacks, he would have named the Colchians by the standard Greek term Aetho and Aethiops, scorched faces, Ethiopians. This is precisely what he did on several other occasions when he wanted to indicate that a people was of the black race, or what he thought was the black race. But not only did not he name the Colchians as Aethiops, Ethiopians, in the same sentence he once again distinguished between Egyptians and Ethiopians. In another quote from the same work, Herodotus refutes the idea the Nile River rose because of melting snow. He notes the Nile begins in places like modern Libya and Ethiopia, which are extremely hot, and then it travels to Egypt, and thus snow could not exist in hot places where the Nile originates. Fake black Israelites falsely claim he describes Egyptians as Negro here. Herodotus wrote, "This way has no more truth in it than the rest, alleging as it does that the Nile flows from melting snow, whereas it flows out of Libya through the midst of the Ethiopians, and so comes out into Egypt. How then should it flow from snow when it flows from the hottest parts to those which are cooler, the people dwelling there, who are of a black color by reason of the burning heat?" On this quote, fake black Israelites are incorrect. It is clear that here Herodotus is describing the Libyans and Ethiopians as being black from the burning heat, since they are from the area where the Nile flows from, that is the area where it would be impossible for snow to form, the Nile River. He's not talking about Egypt, since the Nile does not flow from there, but instead, as he says, the Nile starts where it is burning hot, that is Libya and Ethiopia, and then travels to where it is cooler, that is Egypt. Proponents of fake black Israelism, Anu Mbantu and Gert Muller, falsely claim that ivory heads from the Phos temple in Lachish prove, quote, "The ancient Hebrews were clearly black without question in hair and face." However, the ivory heads in question do not depict Hebrews or Israelites. The Phos temple is actually a pagan Canaanite temple dated to the 15th or 16th century BC. At that period, the Canaanites lived in Lachish. The Israelites did not live there until the 10th century BC. Hence, these temple statuettes were not created by Israelites. So when these authors lie and use pictures of the Phos temple ivory heads as evidence the Israelites were black, and even put pictures of them on the cover of their book as evidence, that is highly deceptive. This movement is based on lies and has no concern for truth. Anu Mbantu and Gert Muller also claim Genesis 28:11 proves Jacob was a Negro, because in that text Jacob allegedly used stones for pillows, which, according to them, would only work if Jacob had an afro to help lend further support. They claim this verse proves Jacob's hair was similar to that of the sub-Saharans, Africans. However, the text does not mention an afro, and based on the Hebrew text, many Old Testament scholars and translations affirm that Jacob used the stone not as a pillow, but instead as protection or self-defense, and placed it near his head in case he had to wake up and use it as a weapon and fight, or as a makeshift enclosure for his head for protection. The Hebrew word is mera asata, and many Old Testament scholars and translations translate it as he put it at his head place, as opposed to some who translate it as he put them for pillows. Old Testament scholar Victor P. Hamilton gives evidence for our reading. The same word occurs in verse 18, which says of mera asat, place at the head place. In addition to verse 18, see 1 Samuel 19:13, 16, 26:7, 1 Kings 19:6. The stone more likely served as protection for his head rather than as a pillow. See 1 Samuel 26:7, where Saul sleeps in a trench with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. Now, Anu Mbantu and Gert Muller also claim the Leviticus 13 leprosy laws show that the ancient Israelites had black skin. They argue, the complexions white, and somewhat dark are contrasted with the Hebrew complexion because they are bright in relation. We are thus told that the Hebrews were neither white, nor dark white, nor somewhat dark. They're claiming since leprosy was said to cause discernible white spots, dark white spots, and somewhat dark spots, that must mean the skin color of the ancient Israelite was black and not any of these colors. Otherwise, such leprosy could not be detectable. However, due to the texture of leprosy, it's quite easy to detect on the human body, even if the color of the leprosy patch is the same as the color of the human body. So this argument holds no weight. A somewhat dark Middle Eastern brown Israelite could spot leprous, somewhat dark skin disease, even though it was the same color as them. Also, when verse 28 correlates the quote-unquote bright spot with the quote-unquote somewhat dark skin disease, this does not mean the somewhat dark skin disease was brighter than the Israelites' normal skin. That is, that the Israelites' skin must have been darker than quote-unquote somewhat dark. This is an erroneous argument, since the original Hebrew word sometimes rendered as bright spot here is ha-baheret, and the NET Bible's notes explains it actually means shiny spot or white spot. But to render this term white spot in this chapter would create redundancy, end quote. Thus, the fake black Israelite argument holds no weight. Fake black Israelites also appeal to Job 30:30, which in the King James says, "My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burnt with heat." However, the context here is Job suffering after being tested by God. When he says his skin is black upon him, the original Hebrew text refers to disease causing Job's skin to rot and fall off. The majority text says, "become dark from upon me," end quote. It is not saying he was naturally black. That's why the ESV renders it as, "my skin turns black and falls from me." This is referring to the effects of the leprous boils Job was inflicted with in Job chapter 2. As Old Testament scholar Franz Delitzsch notes, for the first time he speaks of his disfigurement by leprosy in particular. "My skin is become black from me," i.e., being become black has peeled from me, end quote. Indeed, his skin was rotting off. Job 2:7-8 talks about Job being inflicted with disease, whereby he used broken pottery to scrape off his rotting skin. That is all that is being talked about. It is not saying he was a Negro. Fake black Israelites also misuse Song of Solomon 1:5-6 and claim that it shows Solomon was a Negro. It says, "I am black, but calmly, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Look not upon me, because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards." End quote. However, here Solomon's wife is speaking, not Solomon. Moreover, it clearly says she was black because of suntan, not that she was naturally black. The reason she was so suntanned was because she had to work the vineyards for her brothers, verse 6. Thus, this is referring to suntan and not a Negro complexion. As a matter of fact, the Hebrew verb shazaf, which means to look at, points to the woman personifying the sun as looking at her too long, thereby burning her skin. If you are born black, you don't need to be tanned by the sun to become blackened. An interesting text to discuss is Lamentations 4:7-8 and 5:10. Her princes were purer than snow, whiter than milk. Their bodies were more ruddy than coral. The beauty of their form was like sapphire. Now their face is blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin has shriveled on their bones. It has become as dry as wood. Our skin was black like an oven because of the terrible famine. The context here is the distress of the Jews after the fall and destruction of Jerusalem to the Babylonians in 586 BC. This happened because of the immorality of the Jews. The text in question gives a contrast to how the nobles and commoners used to be, compared to how they were after the fall. Old Testament scholar F.B. Huey notes the descriptions are dramatic hyperbole. When the people were not in sin and destruction, they were symbolically described as purer than snow and whiter than milk, verse 7. Then after their sin and destruction, they are described as having faces blacker than soot and not being recognizable in the streets, verse 8. This is clearly all symbolic exaggeration, denoting their extreme plight. Moreover, if we take it literally and affirm the people were actually turned black, why would they not be recognized in the streets, as verse 8 says? Wasn't black the color of all the Israelites naturally? The fact is, just as verse 8's description of their skin becoming as dry as wood is just a dramatic exaggeration, so is the description of their faces becoming blacker than soot, verse 8, or their skin becoming black like an oven, 5:10. The text is full of symbolism and exaggeration due to plight, and so to try to draw out literal descriptions of natural skin color is erroneous. Another text these groups abuse and misunderstand is Jeremiah 14:2, which says, "Judah mourneth, and the gates thereof languish. They are black unto the ground, and the cry of Jerusalem is gone up." The problem is the usual Hebrew word for black, i.e. shakor, isn't even used here. Instead, the word kadar is. Here this word refers to mourning in black clothing, that is the dress of a mourner, as the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew and English lexicon puts it. This was ancient Israel's custom, where they covered themselves with black sackcloth and ashes when mourning. As Old Testament scholar Charles L. Feinberg notes concerning this verse, the nation is clothed in black to express its mourning, end quote. Thus, the blackness here has nothing to do with skin color. Although fake black Israelites point to certain Egyptian art and claim the men and women have Negro hair, the fact is the ancient Egyptians wore specialized wigs, often braided wigs, and these groups confuse them with Negro hair. However, as the work Historical Wig Styling confirms, like Egyptian women, Egyptian men usually shaved their heads and wore wigs. Likewise, the work Empire of Ancient Egypt confirms, long braided wigs were very fashionable among the wealthy women of ancient Egypt. Both books provide ancient illustrations of such wigs to prove the point.